Hey, so with this tutorial, we're just kind of going to jump right into the world of jitter, which we talked about in class. But just to kind of bring you back up to speed a little quickly, we got Max open here. I got everything up here I need to start making objects and messages and toggles and bangs and whatnot. Um, and last time we were messing around with stuff, I had an object, I give it a name, and it has a certain behavior, random. It'll return a random number. It's expecting a bang in the inlet, so I can make this little button here, this object. And then I need like a little number box right here, so I can display the information that's coming out of that. That bang will travel down into the inlet of the random object. It says causes random number output, and that number will come outside of the outlet there. If I lock the patch, I start clicking it and I can see that random number is coming out. This should be somewhat familiar to you at this point. If it's not, remember to go back through the first week tutorials and on GitHub and on YouTube and get back up to speed with that. But this, just to clear up, maybe not even like a misconception, but you probably hear a lot of people refer to Max as Max MSP Jitter, or even just Max MSP or Jitter. And this right here is kind of the Max side of things. I tend to think of it like this. Max is usually just ints, floats, strings, and lists, I guess a way to put it. And then, for lack of a better way of, or just not getting too deep into it, MSP refers to audio, and jitter refers to video or 3D graphics. And they used to be separate things. Like you used to have to buy jitter separately from Max and whatnot. Now they all exist in the same Max platform. When you buy Max, you have access to all three of these. But basically, when you're working with jitter, you're working with the video signal. You're working with the video with the matrix data. You're working with pixels. You're also working with 3D coordinates sometimes. We might start to get into that. We're mostly going to focus on this part, just like video and frames and maybe even cameras and whatnot. Just to show you really quickly what an MSP thing is, if I make an object and I type the tilde symbol, what is it? So like we get a buffer tilde. Any of these objects with a tilde symbol at the end of it means it's a part of MSP. And usually though, what that means is, see if I make another, what is the other ones? It's like a record. You can see this little patch cord here. It's kind of yellow. It means like an audio signal's coming out of it. You're working with audio data. We might talk about that later in another class. But what we're looking for is all the jitter objects start with jit as a part of the jitter library. And you can see already we have a whole bunch of these right here. So any one of these right here, I'm just going to start with this one, jit.movie. It's one of the most basic ones, but it has a lot of versatility for what we want to do. And I'll just get rid of this right here, and I'll zoom in a little closer even. Oop, gotta bring it up here. And what I pull is this matrix out, the main outlet of the jit.movie object. You can see it's this green cord, and that means that matrix data is coming out of it. And I'm going to talk more about what specifically matrix data is in the next tutorial. But just for today and just for this tutorial, let's just imagine what's coming out of here is basically a video frame. And if we send out a bunch of video frames, we end up with a moving image. And we can do that with the jit.movie object. And it's not that much different from random, where it expects a bang, and then it's going to output something for us. But in this case, the first thing we need to do is we need to send it a message. And you remember that if the objects are what we're using to like make kind of blocks of code, and they basically be like a class where it has certain behaviors and we're giving it arguments to change those behaviors, the message is kind of like a method, I guess you will, or usually they're referred to as attributes and arguments that you're sending to an object. So that could be something as simple as like, if I want the jit.movie object to load a file into it, it has a message called read that I need to send to it. And you can even see right here it says jit.movie method read a movie from a disk file. And I'll take the outlet of that and I'll hook it up to jit.movie. And when I lock the patch and click on read, it's going to send that read message down along to the jit.movie object, and it's going to perform an action based on what it already knows it needs to do. And now I have an open dialog window, and I have this folder full of like random video clips I've made over the years. And if I read it, nothing happened. Something did happen, but we don't see anything happening. But basically what happened is now this movie object is almost like a container, and it contains the movie that we asked it to open. But now we need a way for it to show us what is coming out of that. There's two ways we can do that. There's two objects that are pretty common. One is jit.window. And it says display data in a window. That's great. And we get this little floating window here now. And I'm going to do something that I haven't quite showed you yet in the other tutorials. Just taking a step back, actually, I have a message I could send to it. You know, every time I click on the patch here, this window disappears behind it. And I really want it to just sit on top or float on top of the patch, if you will. And I can turn that on and off by sending a message to jit.window with the name of the argument being, or the method being floating, and it expects a 0 or a 1, with 0 being off, 1 being on. And I can put floating 1, and now if I click on anything, it's not going to disappear anywhere. But you know, like a lot of times I know that I always want it to be floating 1. If I saved the patch right now and reopened it, I would have to resend this message to jit.window right now. So something you can do with any object is all these methods that we're calling from the objects. I can type @ and it'll bring up those attributes or those methods, and I can actually hard code those. So that when I open the patch, it's already set to behave a certain way. And I'm finding the same one right here, floating, and it just wants an argument. I say floating 1. And I can get rid of this. And basically now I've hard coded that behavior and that argument into the object, so it's always just right there. We'll get into why you would want to do that over sending a message, but hopefully you can see why that would be beneficial here in this moment. So getting right back to it, we have our jit.movie object. We had read a movie into it. I have this outlet here, and it says, look at this. It says matrix out, and then it says matrix in. It's like a perfect match. But we're still not seeing anything. Why is that? Well, much like that random object we had, we needed a bang to have it output whatever number it is. Jit.movie also expects a bang. And if we send a bang to it and lock the patch here and I click bang, you can see that a frame has come out of the jit.movie object, passed along, and is now being displayed by the jit.window object. And if I hit bang again, I think I know what's going on. I have to read another movie. This movie's a little darker. We'll grab something that's a little lighter so you can see what's happening on that. There we go. Now we're seeing different frames come up in the movie. And if I hit this really quick, it's almost like I'm actually playing the movie. And what we're looking at is most movies that you're working with are actually like 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second. And each time I click bang, it equals 1 frame. So what I need to do is I need to come up with a way to send 30 bangs a second or 60 bangs a second, depending on how I shot my movie file. And we have an object that does that. We used it last time, I think. It's called metro, and it's basically a metronome. When we turn it on or off, when we give it a 0 or 1 message, it'll start to output a bang every X milliseconds, which you can put that argument right here. And normally I could do something like, we probably use this with our random objects when we said random 1000, or sorry, we would get a random number every 1 second. And metro just wants a toggle. This toggle basically turns into a 0 or a 1. It's like a GUI object. And I'll grab a bang right here. And if I lock it and turn it on, you see a bang coming out every 1 second. And I can hook that up here. I'm actually going to read another movie. This one isn't that great either in terms of what it's showing us. Maybe this cracked eye holes. That sounds beautiful. And now we're seeing a frame every second. One thing that's really important to notice here is these bangs aren't driving the movie forward. What I mean by that is we actually, if each bang was showing us the next frame in the movie, we wouldn't see this amount of difference. We're actually seeing 1 second later in the movie after it's the 1 second after it sends that bang. So the movie, when you load a movie into it, it's actually already playing. And this is just telling the movie to show us where it actually is in playing the movie, which is a little hard to wrap your head around. That's because we need to send something like a message like start. Or, I guess we're already started. We could also send a message like stop. And I could stop it. And now the bangs aren't doing anything because even though it's receiving those bangs, it stopped the movie. And I could start it again with the message start. But let's like play our movie at the right speed here for a second. So if I do the math on it, I think calculator. And I say 1,000 divided by 30 equals about 33.333. So if I wanted to display 30 bangs or 30 frames in a second, I'd need it to happen every 33 milliseconds. And once I put that new number in, I have to resend this on message here. And now you can see our movie's actually playing like a normal movie. We're seeing all the different frames in succession, one after the other. And I could stop the movie. I could start the movie. I could read another movie file in. I'm not going to do that just because I like this video. It's working for us. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts, the skeleton, the guts, you will, of like a really basic movie system. We have this bang system over here with the metronome. We could kind of think of this as like our draw loop or update loop. This is our movie container and player. We're loading a file into it, and then we're playing it back and giving it different messages on how to behave. And this is our movie window, or display data and frames and movies. And in between here and here, we can do a whole bunch of things to mess around with the video, to do different kind of effects. A pretty common one that, like, if you edited any of your photos on your phone even, we have an object called jit.movie. And the Precosa stands for brightness, contrast, saturation. And I can just pass it along there and intercept it. Nothing changed. That's because we need to figure out what methods this jit.Precosa object has, and then send messages with those methods and with arguments in order to change what its initial values are. And if you open the help file, I'll see what they are, but I know what they are off the top of my head because it's brightness and contrast And as I'm typing these up, you can see I'm right because it says jit precosa attribute. It also shows me what kind of argument it needs after the float. And then saturation. So let's say the saturation usually is at 1.0, so let's send 5.0 to it. And boom, right away you can see the color values are just like completely blown out. So I could go back here and I could do saturation 0 and lock the patch and send that. And now there's no color. There's 0 color in the image now. And the same thing we can do with like contrast. I could do 5.0. I don't know why I'm doing 5, just a nice number to see a difference. And now the contrast is much heavier. And we're changing things on the fly about how this image is displayed and how it's manipulated. One thing you're noticing though probably is like every time I want to make a change to this, I have to unlock the patch and type in a number here and then hit bang and all that. And that's not very conducive to what we want to do with Macs. We want to be able to have like an interface and control and be able to manipulate things on the fly. And the way we do that actually is, if this is the old way of doing it, the more interactive way of doing it is rather than putting this argument right here, this number that tells how bright I want it to be, I'm going to put something that looks like this, a $1. And this is just a convention in Macs. This is just a way of saying, I'm going to feed you a number, and when you get that number, I want you to put that number right where that $1 is with that message or that attribute before it and pass it along as a whole message. You'll see what I mean in just a second. I'm going to show you with this message box. If I put anything in the right inlet, it'll show me exactly what the data is. So it's a great way to debug. And I'm going to grab, I just picked this little arrow here. I'm going to grab the float number right here. So that way we get a float instead of an integer. I could also just do a command, or not even command, just the hotkey F while the patch is unlocked. And I'm going to input that into the message. Let me just clean this up for a second. I'm going to move all these away just so we're really focusing on what's happening right here. I'm going to lock the patch. And if I type a number in here, and just really quickly so we see what's, I'm going to contrast 1 and saturation 1. So let's reset the object a little bit. Boom, boom. There we go. But the brightness is set to 3. And I could set it to 0, and there's no brightness, completely black. I go to 4, and I go to 20, 20, and it's like completely blown out in terms of brightness. But what's happening here is now, every time I put a new number in, it's taking that number and putting it in this kind of placeholder location, while also retaining the method right here. And what that allows me to do is, you see, now I can actually just grab the number and scrub up and down. And I basically have my first interactive tool for how I want to manipulate the video image. And you use this all the time in Macs. And this is just for messages. It's not for objects. Objects, like I said, they have this kind of @ symbol where you can hard code something into it. But a message is much more malleable, just a way of passing along basically strings, integers, floats, like I was saying before, kind of more basic Mac stuff. And it just knows that sometimes you want to package things together. And using this $1, I can make it so that I can kind of send values to a message on the fly and have it pass along. So this is just something that's really important to kind of understand as you go forward. And if you have any trouble understanding it, just let me know and we'll figure it out together, and I'll try to explain it in a more concise way. But if you understand, now you can see I can do the same thing with the saturation, contrast things I made. I'll copy paste this float. I copy paste this float. And I can set any of these values. I can scrub through them as well. And this kind of is the beauty of Macs, is we have this object that's doing all these things. I mean, it has the ability to do all these things, I should say. And now we are building basically an interactive interface on the fly that lets us change all these values. And not only can we just change these values, but we can hook other things up to it to change those values for us. I could go back to having that random object. And random's only going to give us an integer. It's not going to give us a float. So let's say 5,000. No, let's say 20,000. And I'm going to multiply that by 0.001. And that'll give me a float. And I'll hook that up to saturation. And I could make a bang. Now we're getting random saturation values. Maybe I also want it to go into negative, so I could say I want it to be between -10 and 10. I could subtract minus, this is a message, or sorry, let me clarify, this is an object. If I pull that object and I say minus, and I can do -10 point, so get that. And I have a float number box there. You can see these are the numbers I'm getting. And I could even take that metro we have over here. Even though it's sending bangs here, it can also have it send bangs over here. And now we get this kind of crazy, the saturation value is jumping all over the place. It's just going haywire, and it's going nuts and all that. So yeah, this is just kind of the structure of how you would want to begin approaching your own kind of video system. Like, what are you going to do to the movie signal here with all these different objects, and like how are you going to expose those methods and those arguments that you want to send it to change how it behaves, and then what do you hook up to it to control the gesture? You know, just as easily, this doesn't have to be random. We could take in like Arduino values from any kind of sensor we build. We could have it calculate how much red is in an image, and based on that, float this number back and forth. So yeah, that's just something to kind of play with. And it doesn't even have to be just the content that we're playing with here. In terms of like doing things to the movie, we can also play with like how things are displayed with the JIT window thing here. I'm just going to take a second here because my disk is almost full, and I don't want this to break while I'm working on this. So I'm just going to delete this folder. I know I don't need that right now. And 1 second. And let's just check that very quick. 20 gigs, cool, that's enough to finish the tutorial. So jumping right back into it, I don't have to just do things to change this. I could also change the window object. If you see like right here, right now it's kind of the aspect ratio of 4:3 of our movie, but I can also grab the corner and it'll stretch the image for sure, but like, you know, suddenly this becomes kind of a malleable tool. But what if I want to change that on the fly? Well, if I go to the JIT window object, I open this, that's the help file. It shows different things we can do to it. It doesn't show the one I want to do to it. There's also the reference file. And this doesn't give us an interactive patch, but it does give us more of almost like kind of a write-up here. It'll actually show all the attributes. At border, it expects an int, and it'll say show the window border on or off. And there's one that's kind of fun that I like. You don't have to use this, but there's a rect one. And it says the window rectangle is specified in pixels, giving the left, top, right, and bottom coordinates of the window from the upper left corner. So it's saying I can change that by giving it 4 integers. And those integers are basically the 2 integers here. The first 2 integers would be the upper left corner. So 0, 0, 0 equals upper left, and 0, 0 equals bottom right. And if that's not making much sense, I know I'm not explaining great here, right? If I just drag this over to here, you would say that the upper left corner is 0, 0 in terms of the pixel location on my screen. Maybe it's actually like 0, 30 because of this little menu bar here. And then right down here on the bottom left, you would say is probably something like 640 by 480 pixels. And this would be something like 320 by 480 pixels, and this would be 320 by 240, etc. So I can make a message and doing exactly what I was talking about there. I can say rect, and I can do that 0, 0, which are these two, the first, the upper left, and then 640, 480. And I can lock the patch and send that message. And that's exactly what happened. Actually, our little movie bar actually, let's lower it a little bit so we can actually grab it if we needed to. Maybe a little more. And it's working perfectly. It's saying like start drawing the send the window to 0, 60 of the upper left corner and 640, 480 of the bottom right corner. And if I added 100 to each of those, 100, 160, 740, 580, it's probably going to move down 100 and over 100. Exactly what happened. But I want to hook up all this random stuff to this, just like I did with this. But one thing we need to figure out is I have these 4 values coming in here, and I need to figure out, this is where I need like a list of information, and 4-element list preceded by the word rect, so that the JIT window knows what to do. And I can set that up like this. Very similarly to this, I can say $1, and then I'm going to say $2, $3, $4. Sorry about that. I'm going to move this back here. I'm going to get rid of this guy for a second. And basically what I need to do is I need to have 4 of these integer boxes. And what was happening here before was, this isn't that complex because this $1 is saying, take the first value of whatever information I'm receiving, whatever data I'm receiving, and put it right here. And we're only sending one value, so that one value goes to this $1. What this is saying now is, take the first value and put it right here, take the second value and put it right here, take the third value, put it right here, fourth value, put it right here. And you might think maybe I could do it like this. And it doesn't really work. In fact, the window's completely disappeared. And if you see, if I visualize what's coming out of this message when I change any of these numbers, they're only affecting that first value. Because these are all still individual elements that they don't have an order to them right now. They're not a part of a list. So every time it receives this, it's just going, okay, it's one element and it'll go here. I'm still waiting for all of these. So there's an object that allows us to do that. And you've probably seen me use it in some of the other tutorials. There's a pack and there's POC. And we're going to use POC for this one, P-A-K. And what it is going to do is going to pack or POC together as many different individual elements as we want into a numbered list. And I'll say that I need something that's 4 elements long. So the first element's going to be an integer. I'll do a 0 to represent that. And the second element's going to be an integer, so 0 to represent, onwards and onwards. And when I hit enter, now I have these 4 inlets. And this says element 1 in the list, element 2 in the list, element 3 in the list, etc. If I had needed an 8-element list, I just add 4 more of those and it automatically creates those inlets. And they'll all come together as a combined list from those inputs. So we only needed 4. So now I'll take these and that goes in the first, that one goes in the second, that goes in the third, that goes in the fourth. And now and let's visualize what's happening here. You can also visualize that little list that's coming out here, just so we see everything that's going on. If I type 160 in here, it's the same thing happened before. The first element gets changed to 160, but now the second element, that $2, if I say 640, 650, now that goes into the second element here, and it goes rect, and here's the first element, the second element. And I'll make this bigger. This will be 540. Ooh, and now we're getting somewhere. And then this will be 780. And now we've got this JIT window where the upper left corner starts at 160, 650, and the bottom right corner is at 540, 780. And I can actually drag and grab like this. So I have this dynamically generating sized window. And you know what I'm going to do next? I'm going to get random, and let's say that I think my computer screen is Retina, so I'm going to be like 3840 and 2760. I'm guessing. I think these are the resolution of my screen, because these two are the X and these two are the Y. And it is all over the place. Our little movie window is just jumping everywhere. And this is kind of working. I have a feeling that when these numbers are smaller than these numbers, it doesn't get represented that well. But another thing we could do, like, just to make sure that, let's say I want the movie to always be a specific size. I want it to be 320 by 240. I can just add 320 and add 240 to that random one. And now I'm gonna, this is 1920, 1080. Oh, that's probably, oh, there we go. Whoa, it's all over the place. And this is like one of the things you can think about. Not only do you have to affect how the image is being manipulated in terms of like color and saturation and brightness, or if it's melting and stuff, but the window that you're displaying the information on can also be manipulated. And you can have multiple windows of information too. I could have, I could just copy paste that. And this could be showing an entirely different movie, and this be sitting right in our center here, and then we have another movie that's just jumping and bouncing around and whatnot. So yeah, this is two last things I'm going to show you. I know that I've been throwing a lot at you already. I'm going to stop that random right there. And I'm just going to hide all of this somewhere else. You're probably wondering to yourself, I have a couple of different movies I want to play, actually. I'm tired of having to open this dialog window every single time. There's a great object called, oop, that's not the U menu. And this is actually a GUI object, so once I hit enter, it's going to look like an object, but it's not quite. Once I hit enter, it's going to change. And now it has this little arrow and everything. It's because it's a drop-down menu that we can fill with files. So just see. And in order to fill it with our movie files that we made from last week, I need to select this object while the patch is unlocked and hit Inspector over here. So far we've only done Max Console, which is like a print to console thing. With this Inspector over here, I think I showed you could do things like you could change the background color of the object, or even maybe even like the font and whatnot. But we can also change things like if it says prefix or folder here, I can choose I'm going to open my folder full of all these movie files. And then I'm going to click auto populate here. And now, if I lock the patch, it's populated. I can actually click on it, and it gives me a list of every single file that's in that folder. And it'll also give me the the computer pathway to get there. So I can unlock this, and there's 3 outlets. The dump out we can kind of ignore, but one thing that's kind of weird is, nope, not that one, is the first outlet doesn't give us the movie file path. It just gives us the index number of the list, which can be, there will be programmatic reasons why we might want that information, but what we really want is what's coming out of the middle inlet, and I'll show you what I mean with the print object. And if I take that middle outlet, and let's go to Max Console over here, and I read here, and it's actually printing is the actual file path to that file. So Macintosh users, Matt Romine, desktop, texture cuts, yada, 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 all the way down to MOV. And the same way I can do brightness with a value after it, in this case it was a float, I could also pass a string to the read message. So I could make a read $1, and you may, you're like, why do I have to package together all these numbers, but this is all just like one individual element right here? That's because this is a string. It basically has quotation marks around it, and it gets treated as one element. And so it's not a list, it's just one really long string. And we're going to put that string after the read message, and if I pass that along, and I choose a new movie, you can see that it sent read followed by the file path, and it actually selected a new movie for me. Now we have kind of an interactive menu for choosing different movies we want to play with. And then lastly, again, I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, the JIT window is not the only way that we have to display information. We could also make an object called jit.Pwindow. Oop, let me slow down there. JIT. If I make an object, and I type jit.Pwindow, autocomplete it, the P stands for patcher. And it's the same thing as this, except rather than giving us a floating window, it gives us a little window that only exists in our patcher. And this is a great way for debugging information. I can just take the outlet, jitter matrix signal, send it here, and it'll show us our movie information in the patcher. And we can set these up all along to see how things are affected. You can see here, the original movie, there's this color right here like this, but then when I change the brightness values, we can see how the JIT Precosa object is enacting change against the image and what the original image we loaded in looks like. You want to be very careful with these though, because they're actually really resource heavy, and you get kind of addicted to them. You're like, oh, this looks so cool, like, and I can see everything that's happening throughout the signal flow. But they're really resource heavy, and if you use more than 4 or 5 of them, you'll start to notice that your frame rate is just dropping like crazy. So you should really only use these when you want to, like a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just have one in the corner of my patch, and if I'm double checking something, I'll just hook it up and be like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I thought it was, or I hook it up and I go, oh shit, actually that's not right at all, I must have done something wrong, or coded something wrong, or I'm not getting anything at all, and I actually blocked the signal. So yeah, like I said, a lot, and different tricks you can do with the movie object. I put some of those in the GitHub repo. In the cheat sheets, I put a lot of jitter objects that are fun to start playing with. And they're really the same structure usually. They do different things. You can check the help file for what they do. And then you change how they behave, and you grab access to what those objects do by using messages and floats and strings and whatnot to change its behavior. So yeah, if there are any questions, as always, grab office hours with me. I love talking about this stuff, and hopefully this clarifies just how to set up like a basic little movie player. And yeah, see you guys soon.